Hello everyone, how are you? Welcome to Beyond the Cloud. In this video, we will walk you through configuring a VPC endpoint to securely connect a private EC2 instance to an Amazon S3 without needing a NAT gateway. So your connection will still be in Amazon network without going into the public internet. So by the end of this tutorial, you will know how to ensure a secure and efficient communication between your EC2 instance and an S3 within your VPC. If you are new to this channel, kindly like, share, subscribe, and comment your thoughts. Let me know what you liked and what you didn't. I will try to make some recommended videos from you guys if you have any. So sit tight and enjoy.
So in part 1 today, we are going to explain how an EC2 instance in private subnet can access an S3 bucket without exposing itself into the overall internet. So the idea is to have the VPC endpoint service in between. So what is a VPC endpoint? So an S3 VPC endpoint allows your resources within a VPC to communicate directly with the S3 without traversing the public internet. This AWS feature offers significant benefits in terms of security, performance, and cost effectiveness. As you can see in this diagram, I have a VPC in my AWS account, and within that VPC, we have two subnets. One is public, one is private, and both of them have two EC2 instance on it. So the public subnet EC2 instance doesn't have a problem going into the S3 bucket because it has a route to the internet gateway, and it will go through the S3 bucket via this internet, which is exposing the data to internet, which is kind of risky from a security perspective. But if you look at the private subnet EC2 instance, so the private subnet EC2 instance doesn't have the internet access at all because there is no NAT gateway you can see here. So we have not placed any NAT gateway inside our VPC or the public subnet. So that means our private subnet cannot go to the internet. So if it cannot go to the internet, then how he can access the S3 service? So there is the solution lies in AWS where we have to use this VPC endpoint, and from the VPC endpoint, the route will be forwarded to your S3 bucket. So this is very nice feature without exposing the route in the public internet. So this private subnet EC2 instance can go privately within this VPC endpoint to S3 bucket, and your whole data in the communication remains private. There are a couple of key benefits of using this VPC endpoint service, that the traffic between your VPC and the S3 never leaves the Amazon network. That means it does not go to the internet or internet gateway. There is no NAT gateway required, which means you are actually reduces the need of NAT gateway, which in turns reduces the cost effectiveness. So eliminates the data transfer charges between the traffic between your VPC and the S3 in the same region because there is no NAT gateway. There is low infrastructure cost. Allows your resources in the private subnets to access S3 without requiring NAT gateway, as I explained. And also VPC endpoint policies to control access to S3 resources. So, and also from the compliance perspective, it helps to meet the data privacy and regulatory requirements by keeping traffic on your AWS inside your AWS network. There are a couple of use cases for using this S3 VPC endpoint. So one of them is securely backing up your data from EC2 instance to S3. So if you have a secure data in your EC2 instance, and if you want to back it up in your S3, you don't want to go over internet. Rather, you go through VPC endpoint and back up your data in S3 in a private, secure, accessing S3 hosted static website content from your inside your VPC, streaming data from S3 to an application in a private subnet, facilitating the secure data lakes and analytics workflow that can also use this VPC endpoint service to go to S3. So, so by leveraging this S3 VPC endpoints, organizations can significantly enhance their AWS infrastructure security posture, performance, while potentially reducing the cost associated with the data transfer and network management. So what we will do, we will spin up everything from scratch, and I will show you how you can access from a public EC2 instance the S3 bucket, also from a private EC2 instance an S3 bucket. So I hope you will enjoy this video, to stick to it. Let's go to the demo now. So I am back in my AWS account where we will be spinning up this VPC, this subnets, this EC2 instance, this VPC endpoints and everything. Now, let's do one thing. Let's first of all create a VPC in our account. So let's create a VPC. So we have in your VPC, I have this default VPC that is available. I mean, we can definitely take this. That is not a problem. But I think there is everywhere auto-assign public IPv4 address is there. So I don't think we need this VPC. So we will create one. So we will create a VPC and I will select VPC and more so that it creates everything for me. So the name I will be giving it as a S3 endpoint VPC. So this VPC is my S3 endpoint VPC. The CIDR block I will not change. It can stay whatever it needs. And then the number of availability zone is 2. This is fine. This also we don't have to do anything. Number of public subnet is 2. Number of private subnet is 2. This is fine. So we have 2 public subnet and 2 private subnet. So this here in the NAT gateway, as I said, if you see in our architecture diagram, we don't need any NAT gateways. So I will not give any NAT gateways here. So because apart from NAT gateway, instead of NAT gateway, we will use VPC endpoint. So NAT gateway, we don't need it. And VPC endpoint, currently I will select none because you can also give the VPC endpoint as S3 gateway here. You can select it right away and do it. But for clarity purpose, I will not do that. So I will select as none as of now, and then I will just click on create the VPC. So while the VPC is being created, it will take some time. So as you can see, everything is being created. Route table is created, verifying route table. So everything is done. Now I can view my VPC. So here is my VPC, and if you go to your VPC, and this is my S3 endpoint VPC, which is now available. Now let's look at the subnets. So if you go to the subnets and just refresh this page, you see uh, one public, one private, public 2 and private 2. So there are 2 public subnet, 2 private subnet has been created. Fine. Route table also has been created according to my requirement. Internet gateways, it was there for my public subnet. This is fine, but what we are interested is the NAT gateway. So there is no NAT gateway created. Fine. Now our VPC and subnets are done. So let's spin up a couple of EC2 instances. So one EC2 instance is the public subnet and another one is the private subnet. So let's go to the EC2 console. And on the instance running, there is nothing actually, which is the desired state. So I don't have any instance running. So I will launch an instance. And this one I will give name as public EC2. And I will not change anything here. Only thing I will change is a new key pair. So I need a new key pair. So EC2 key pair. And this is fine. I need a PIM file. So create a new key pair. I have created the new key pair. So and then I will just save this in my desktop. So the key pair name is EC2 key pair. This is fine, and I will edit the network setting. And on the VPC section, I will select my VPC, that is the S3 endpoint VPC. And on the S3 endpoint VPC, this one I need in the public subnet. So in the public one, I will select it as a public one. It has already been selected. And auto assign public IP, you can select is it is enable, disable, or whatever, but I will select is enable so that I can distinguish between my private and private public subnet. I will show you how we can do. And from the security group, I will create a new security group where I will say that from port 22 anywhere can be accessed. So in the production environment, do not use anywhere, rather do it with my IP. I think this is more secure, but um, for ease of accessing or ease of following this demo, you can do it as source type anywhere. So from port 22, we can use it from anywhere. This is fine. Apart from that, I will not change anything. So what we have done, we have given the EC2 a name as a public EC2, and we have changed the VPC to our VPC that we have created and placed it in a public subnet and auto assigned a public IP. That's it. And then I will launch the instance. While the instance is launched or being ready, what I will do, I will launch another instance and I will give it the name as private EC2. And then on the key pair, I will select the same key pair for ease of access, so that from the public EC2 instance, whenever I will log into the public EC2 instance, I don't have to change the key pair. I can have the same key pair. And on the network settings, I will select the same with my previous VPC, S3 VPC endpoint, the one that we have created, but this time we will place this EC2 instance in a private subnet, that is here in this private subnet. And I will select and this is already selected, that the auto assign public IP is disabled. And from the security group rule from port 22, I will, for ease of access, I will select it from anywhere. This is fine. And apart from that, I will not change anything. So what we have done, we have given it as a name, changed the VPC to our newly created VPC, assigned it a key pair name, auto assign public IP disabled, and a security group where port 22 can be reachable from anywhere. But again, in production environment, do not do that. Add a custom IP address for your PC. Then I will launch the instance. So while the instances are being launched, let's go back to the EC2 console and refresh running status or refresh the whole status, and I can see that my public EC2 instance is being launched. That is my public EC2 instance in the public subnet, it is launched, and the private one is launching or it is status in play. What else we need? We have the internet gateway already assigned to our public subnet, and we need an S3 bucket. So let's go to the S3 service and we will create a bucket, and the bucket name that I will give is S3 endpoint bucket, then some random number. You can give the bucket name whatever you want, and the block public access should be enabled, anything. Now I will create the bucket, and the bucket is there. The bucket is created. So now my bucket is ready. So if you go to buckets, you will be able to see the bucket is there with the AWS region and everything. So my bucket is also ready. And we go back to our EC2 console now, and let's see if all my instances are running or not. And here we can see all my instances are running. Now what we are going to do? Now we are going to log into the EC2 instance. How are we going to do that? You can use any of your terminal. You can, if you are using Windows, you can use putty to do that. There are multiple way you can do that. You will find videos out of it in YouTube, or you will find lots of good suggestion in the Google as well, to how to log into the public subnet or the public EC2 instance from putty. But as I am using macOS, so I will use the terminal to log into the EC2 instance with my key pair. So to do that, so there are a couple of commands that I will be using. So I will first add the key pair to my terminal, then use the same key pair to log into the EC2 instance. But to log into the EC2 instance, we need a couple of things. So first of all, we need the public IP address. And for private EC2 instance, if you see, there are no public IP address. So how will we log in? So first of all, we will log into the public EC2 instance, and from there we will jump to the private EC2 instance. So we will not be able to log into the private EC2 instance directly from our terminal, because it does not have an internet access, it does not have anything. So we have to log into public, and then from there we have to log into private. So this public EC2 instance will act as a bastion host in our case. And from both of the EC2 instance, I will show you if we will be able to access the S3 bucket. So first of all, now in this point of time, even if I log into the public EC2 instance, will it be able to access the S3 bucket? I don't think so. Why? Because if you see the public EC2 instance, the IAM profile, there is nothing. There is no IAM profile created. So what we need to do, we need to create a IAM profile for both of the instance. So modify IAM role, and I will create a new IAM role. Why do we need to create an IAM role? Because S3, because from EC2 instance, to S3, to access this S3 service or to list down the S3 buckets there, you need to have access for at least read-only access for this S3 bucket. As EC2 instance does not have it, so I have to give it access. Now on the AWS service, I will choose EC2 instance because the role that I will be associating is with the EC2 instance. So this is why the service should be EC2. If you want to, so this is how the role is created. If you want to create another service role, you just choose the service role as this way. Anyway, as I will be attaching this role to EC2, so EC2 role is fine. Now I will choose next, and then I will choose here the S3 role. So I think S3 read-only access role is enough. You can give that, but for ease of access, I will give S3 full access as of now to my EC2 instance. And then choose next, and then I will give EC2 role, and then I will create the role. So the role is created, and if you just refresh here, it will show you the role here, EC2 role. And I will attach this role to my both of the EC2 instance. Now if you select this public EC2 instance and scroll down here, you will be able to see my IAM role is EC2 role. Similarly, on the private EC2 instance, you go to actions, security, modify IAM role, select the EC2 role and update IAM role. So I hope you understood why do we need this role, because EC2 instance need to access the S3 bucket. Now we are complete. Now hopefully if we log into this particular EC2 instance, we will be able to access the S3 bucket and we will be able to list down the S3 bucket. This is what we want to do. Now how to log in? So first of all, I will be running my SSH agent. So the command is eval, then the SSH agent. So my agent PID, process ID, it gave like 16532. My SSH agent is running. Then if you remember, on my desktop, I have downloaded the key pair, right? While you create it, it will also download it directly. So on the desktop, I have saved that. So this is my key pair, EC2 key pair. This is my key pair. So I have to change the permission of this key pair. So why? Because if the key pair permissions are wide open, then your login will not work. So you only need to have the read and write permission to the key pair. So that's why we need to change it to 600 and then the key pair name. And I think I have done a mistake, so it needs to be in the double quotation. Yeah. So this will change the permission of the key pair to only me. Now we will be able to log into the key pair, or we will be able to add the key pair to our SSH agent. So to add it, we have this SSH add and then the key pair name. So you see here the identity has been added. So the SSH key pair identity has been added. Now if you do SSH, so we can see the key pair by listing down all the key. So to list down is whatever added key pair is add, then L, I guess minus L, and then it will show you, it will show me the key pair as this one. This one is the added key pair. So why I added the key pair? Because then I don't have to forward the key pair. I don't have to explicitly add the key pair every time in my public EC2 instance. So you remember, from the public EC2 instance, we will go to the private EC2 instance with the same key pair. So I don't have to do it again. So this is why I have added, and this is my list of key pair that is added. Now we will log into our public EC2 instance. As our key pair is added, we will use the same key pair to log into the public EC2 instance. So the command is ssh, then minus a, and then EC2 hyphen user, @ then we need the public IP of my EC2 instance, and this is my public IP. So why we have used -a? So -a means we are forwarding the same key pair to my public EC2 instance, so that when we will be using when we will try to log into the private EC2 instance, I don't have to specify the key pair with -i again. So -a means whatever the added key pair, we will use the same one and try to log into the public EC2 instance. Now, if I click, if I hit enter, and then it will ask me that if you want to see or to continue, I will say yes, and then I am inside my EC2 instance. So if you see the public IP of the private IP of the EC2 instance, let me clear the screen. So the private IP of the EC2 instance is 10.0.13.126. Now if I go back to my EC2 console and you see 10.0.13.126, so this is my EC2 instance. So from here, right, from here, can we do curl google.com? Can we do it? So or maybe so you see here, if I do google.com, it gave me some data. That means it has internet access. So my google.com has been, my google.com is working, right? So I will clear the screen. That means my public EC2 instance have internet access. So let's try. So let's try to list S3 bucket. So from my public EC2 instance, it should be able to list down my EC2, my S3 bucket. So if I do AWS S3 ls, so here is the bucket that we have created, and it is able to list down my S3 bucket because now my traffic is going over internet and it is accessing the S3 service, and because it has internet access. Now the next part, where we will log into the private EC2 instance from my public EC2 instance. So to log in, we have this command ssh, then ec2-user @. Now we are logging to the private EC2 instance. So on the private EC2 instance, I will select the private IP address and then this one, and I will hit enter. And now I am inside my private EC2 instance. You see 10.0.128.180, 10.0.128.180. So here now we have, I am inside my private EC2 instance. We will do the same thing. So can we access our S3 bucket from here? Let's see if we can. AWS S3 ls. Okay, we cannot, because it does not have an internet access, it cannot go through the internet gateway, and it cannot find the S3 bucket that it needs. So this will not work out, so I have cancelled it. Even if you do curl google.com, it cannot access because it does not have internet access. That means my private bucket cannot access in private EC2 instance cannot access the bucket. This is why, or this is where we need the VPC endpoint service. Now, if you see here, it does not have internet access. So how can an EC2 instance access the S3 bucket? So this is why our VPC endpoint service will come up. Now let's go back to EC2 console. Let's open VPC. And your VPC, and we have this VPC already. On the left hand side under VPC we have endpoints, and under endpoints we will create an endpoint. So I will give the endpoint name as S3 endpoint, and on the AWS service I will choose S3, and on the S3 one I will select the gateway endpoint, that is the Amazon AWS.us east1.s3. This is the gateway endpoint. So there is a difference between an interface endpoint and a gateway endpoint. So the main difference between the gateway endpoint and interface endpoint is that gateway endpoint uses the route tables, whereas the interface endpoint uses the ENI, or the network interface. The cost is gateway interface is free, interface endpoints is charged anyway. The gateway endpoint only access to the VPC, but the interface endpoint is VPC on-prem and other VPCs as well. In gateway, there is no additional IP address needed, but interface endpoint, as it is associated with ENI, so it needs an additional IP address from your VPC. Cross-region access for the gateway endpoint is not supported, where the interface endpoint is supported. So, in summary, the gateway endpoint is generally more simpler, more cost-effective, suitable for most S3 use cases, but interface endpoint offer more flexibility in terms of access to outside of VPC and provide additional security controls, but an extra cost needed because you need a new IP, new ENI, new NAT gateway. If you need to know more about this interface endpoint or gateway VPC endpoint, please let me know in the comment section. I can also make a video out of it. Anyway, so under the S3 endpoint, we have given the name S3 endpoint, AWS service. I chose this S3 gateway endpoint. And on the VPC section, I will choose the VPC that we have created. So this is my VPC. So how can you choose the route table correctly? So here, 4 route tables are listed, right? Now, on the public route table, it should not be because my EC2 instance is not on the public subnet. So, there will be 2 route table, which is the private route table. And on the private route table, if you see the associated ID, which subnet it is associated with. So, the subnet 395 is the one that is associated with my EC2 instance. So, if you go to the private, okay. So, if you go to the private EC2 instance and then under networking, you see the subnet ID ending with 395. So this is the route table that I need to associate my VPC endpoint. So for ease of access, I will choose both of them, both my private route table. This is fine. This is you can choose, but you can stringent to only the last one. This is also fine. And apart from that, I will just give full access for ease of access. You can also give custom access if you need. You can create the policy, you can give the custom access as well. There is a policy creation tool as well, and that's all. There is a name tag and I will create the endpoint. Now let's see if the endpoint is created and it is available. It shows that it is available, and on the route table, which is the most interested one, you see on the route table it has 2 routes. One route table, that is the private route table, it is associated with the subnet, this one, and another route table is also associated with is the desired subnet. And if you go to the route table and select the private route table that we are mainly associated with or mainly concerned, and if you just refresh and again select this one, and on the route you see here, if there are any connection other than the local one, then it will target the VPC endpoint. This is what we need. So this has created automatically. This is what you will be able to see on the private one again. But on the public, it is only the internet gateway. So it is going through internet to access the S3 bucket. But on the private, you will be able to see that it is going to the VPC endpoint and accessing the S3 bucket, which is more secure, and on this private as well. Now, let's go back to our EC2 instance. This, remember, we did not log out from our private EC2 instance. So we are still inside the private EC2 instance. And from here, if we again do AWS S3 LS, now we see our S3 bucket, and this is purely going with the VPC endpoint service. This is what we wanted to. This is what we want. But let's see if we still do curl google.com, it still does not have any internet access, but it can access my S3 bucket. So my S3 bucket is listed, and all the traffic from my private EC2 instance to the S3 bucket is going via this VPC endpoint in a very secure and private way. You can do whatever you want. Now you are inside this private EC2 instance. You can just exit to the public one. Now you are the public EC2 instance, and if you still do AWS S3 LS, you will still be able to access the S3 bucket, but from the public EC2 instance, it is going via internet. The traffic is more open. But again, if you go to the private EC2 instance and do AWS S3 LS, this still works because I have VPC endpoint associated with it, the private subnet, and the traffic is going via the S3 via privately and more secure. So this is what I wanted to show you in this part, that how to access an S3 service from a private subnet in a very secure and cost effective way. We don't need NAT gateway, we don't need extra IP addresses. This is very cost effective way. I really hope you enjoyed this video and you really liked it. On the part 2, or the next part that we will be doing, I will explain this slide later, but this is very interesting. That is also very interesting. So on the part 2, on the private subnet, we will not have an EC2 instance, rather we will have an Lambda, which will also try to access the S3 bucket, and the whole setup, whole infrastructure setup we will do with AWS CDK and Python. We will deploy everything with Python and CDK. We will do it everything from scratch. I will give you the code and everything. So stay tuned for part 2, and I really hope that you like the part 1 here. So that's it for today, and I hope really you enjoyed this video. If you are new to this channel, kindly like, share, subscribe, and give your thoughts, what you like and what you didn't. And if you already know this channel, please comment your thoughts as well. What can we do better? And I will be back with another exciting video of part 2, where we will use CDK and Python. So till then, take care. Goodbye.